comes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who?
Seers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Come on, Julia. Oh, no. I will if you will. You go, gal. That's right.
Welcome back to the CBS News coverage of the vice presidential debate. Michigan and its 15 electoral votes are part of the blue wall, the states that Democrats like to think are firmly in their camp. But in 2016, they thought that too, and Donald Trump became the first Republican to win there in nearly 30 years. CBS News national correspondent Jerika Duncan is in Grand Rapids, Michigan, speaking to voters. Good evening, Jerika.
Good evening to you. Good evening to everyone. You know, Kent County is where we're at here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's a very important county when you look at the numbers. And by that, I mean that this county has picked the winner of the presidential election 3 times out of the 4 last. It shows us that people are watching this debate because they want to hear more about these candidates. What specifically are you looking for, Bill? And I'm going to start with you because you voted for Trump in 2016. You didn't vote at all in 2020. And here you are today trying to figure out who exactly you're going to vote for. So what are you looking for?
I'm looking for a good economy.
A good economy?
Yep. Safety.
Safety?
Yeah.
And Eric, what about you?
I mean, it's safety.
And safety. Oh, yeah, crime. Mm-hmm.
I know that you're also a voter that was leaning more toward Nikki Haley at one point. That's correct?
No.
Oh, you weren't okay, that was Holly?
That was me.
I'm so sorry. You know, there's so many notes that go out. Well, Ellie, let's go back to you then, because I think it's interesting when you have to make this decision, you're looking at this debate while so many people already know who they're going to vote for. You were looking at Nikki Haley as someone that you were really considering, but you're a bit torn. Mm-hmm. So is there something that these candidates could say or do that would clarify where they stand on any position or have you feel more confident in who you're going to vote for when you leave today?
Yeah, I think the 3 most important things to me in this election are definitely inflation, abortion rights, and then also gun control. I have 2 little kids, and they're going to school, so that's starting to be a little scary now.
And Max, what about you? You have 3 children. You're planning to vote for.
I think we have about 20 minutes until it starts.
Talk to us about why and what are you hoping to get out of this debate tonight?
I'm really interested to see both Vance and Walz's viewpoints. My biggest concerns and focus points for this election is the economy, immigration, and a strong foreign policy. Kind of shore up some of, our involvements overseas and bring it back home and get, us squared away here.
And that's what we've heard time and time again, even in our polling, the economy, safety, immigration. These are issues that a lot of Americans care about. Our job is always to make sure we reveal America to itself. So we thank you guys for joining us tonight to help let people see, regardless of how they feel, this is kind of a taste of what voters are thinking and feeling in this state of Michigan, which we know will be very important in this election. So we'll send it back to you guys, and we'll check in with you a little bit later.
Yeah, you're not going anywhere. We're going to be checking in with you all evening, Jerika. Thank you. Ed Gordon, I want to bring you back in. You've got an important perspective in this because you live outside of Detroit, and
Okay.
the suburbs of Detroit
20 minutes ago.
in particular are expected to play a very important role. Given the breaking news that we are watching unfold in the Middle East right now, Vice President Kamala Harris is facing significant questions about her policy in Israel and how.
I don't even know why they're bringing up policy. It's ridiculous.
President Biden, what are you hearing when you are talking to your neighbors and voters in this area on this front?
Don't be looking at me like that.
Midwesterner, born
What was that
and
look?
raised in Detroit, and today's
I'll have you know we live in the
Middle
South.
East can prove crucial to this state. There is a large Arab population outside of.
You know what? I'm just gonna do it, Amber. I'm gonna spend my whole time on here just yapping about Donald Trump, Trump tax,
administrations previous, they
and
don't see
how much I love him.
balanced view from the White House.
How much
as
I'm
relates
such a Trump
to,
supporter.
Israel and
Okay.
their positions, and so
You're
what
cool with
we're
that?
seeing today is going to
Because I am. I want to be right here. It's gonna be uploaded
this group
to the internet.
be energized.
Believe it or not, and it's gonna say I am a Trump supporter.
Behind Kamala Harris, that was the thought early on.
What?
But there has not.
I can't be
clear
a Trump
path
supporter.
to her.
Why not?
Because of that.
Yeah, I think the question is whether they show up, right?
That's
election day.
that's ridiculous.
Talked to several voters.
I
on
don't
this
care
very
about the blue
question.
rights anymore.
This was before what
No,
the
watch out
administration
for it.
would
That's
argue
not-
was a
that's right.
clarifying moment. Iran attacking Israel. That takes away some of the obscurity of, is it a militia or what is happening in the region around? It's now
Holy
Iran
shit!
and Israel.
They're actually
Harris
apparently
hopes that
overtime
that
available
clarifies
right
that
now
Israel
for
must
TD.
defend itself and must be supported.
$45 an hour.
On the debate stage tonight about unequivocal support.
Yeah, but it's one of the no water having, standing on your feet for 8 hours, can't sit down, fucking shit. I'm just not doing it.
That group
That's just not worth it.
decided to withhold their votes.
Hey, I mean, it's good money though, but I'm definitely gonna pass.
Circumstances change. Thank you both very much. When we come back, childcare is expensive, housing is expensive. Those are just two of the issue areas we'll look at as we examine where the two candidates stand on everyday costs.
Maybe JD Vance will have a concept of a plan for those costs. That's what I'm wondering.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides is your place for fact-based, unbiased reporting.
At the White House, Capitol, on the campaign trail. What do you say to those in your party? Any cracks in the Republican Party?
Our reporters and our anchors travel the country talking to voters like you
about the issues that matter most.
Immigration is really a factor right now
that are going to be driving your decisions.
What would you say to those who say, look, that's just democracy at work?
Listening to you and bringing your voice into our coverage.
I want a strong, proud America.
Is democracy on the ballot in 2024?
Let us help you decide.
America Decides on CBS News 24/7.
Stream our expanded one-hour program Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend
somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Come on, Julia. Oh, no. I will if you will.
You go, Gail.
That's right.
Let me see if you can find me.
I want to make sure that my voice is heard, but also that I lift up other voices.
You can't write a better script.
Yeah, boy. It's gonna be a ride. We'll see you 7 o'clock sharp.
All right, the economy has been and it continues to be the #1 issue for voters heading into this election. A recent CBS News poll shows that voters are feeling better about the economic climate as gas prices and interest rates have dropped, but 59% say the economy is still in bad shape. Senior business and technology correspondent Jolene Kent has been digging into both campaigns' plans to tackle these high prices of housing, childcare, and basic costs. Jolene, good evening. So what do you expect to hear tonight from Senator Vance and Governor Walz on their plans to tackle these high prices?
Cecilia, great to see you. Get ready to hear a lot about the economy and the cost of living. You can expect Senator Vance to continue to hammer Harris and Walz on inflation. And our math using government data shows that grocery prices are up 21% since Biden and Harris took office, even though they have leveled out lately and wage growth has been keeping pace with inflation. You can expect Vance to hit on Trump.
I'm calling it right now. There's not going to be any policy debated in this entire thing.
Even though economists estimate that the Trump tariff proposals would cost
I'm going to get like a bingo card for all the nonsense that JD Vance can be spewing. And for Walz to be like, well, back when I was a kid.
Though, keep in mind, neither campaign has really offered much specifics on how they're actually going to implement and carry out these proposed policies, Cecilia.
Yeah, still waiting for a lot of details on that one. As we are talking right now, shipping has been brought to a halt along so much of the East Coast and in the Gulf of Mexico as a result, of course, of this port strike that we've been following. How much do you expect that to impact prices in the coming weeks and days?
Look, it's at least 25,000 union dock workers at 14 ports from Houston to Boston. They walked off the job last night at midnight, right? And according to JP Morgan Chase, the strike could cost the economy up to $5 billion a day. And economists worry that a longer strike would disrupt the supply chain on everything from your perishable foods to cars and construction materials. But we also know that things like fuels for home heating oil, for example, diesel gas, those are actually transported in ways that are not expected to be impacted by the strike. And according to the New York governor, Kathy Hochul, there's no need to be, running and panicking and going to the grocery store and stockpiling goods as you might have done, during the pandemic.
Sure, still these concerns coming just 5 weeks.
No, I think the strike that we're having right now, the strike they're doing down at the docks, it makes a lot of sense. And it seems kind of crazy to me that anyone, specifically Republicans, are sitting there saying that it's the workers' fault for wanting to do all that, and they're going to bring us to a standstill or a halt in all our goods. But let's be very honest, they're clearly worth the money if they're sitting there and everyone's getting pissed at them. It just shows they deserve to have a little bit more pay.
Than inflation. It's almost double the rate of inflation. Both of these candidates have said they support permanently expanding the child tax credit. Harris and Walz have also said federal paid family leave would be an important priority here if they win. But again, few specifics on how long it should be. And we do know that Vance told our colleague Margaret Brennan back in August that he supports an expanded child tax credit, expanded child care options for families beyond preschool and daycare. But that grandparents' comment certainly striking a chord. saying aunts and uncles should be helping out more too.
Yeah, you better wait, buddy.
Jolene, I was really struck by this next one on housing. A CBS News poll found that half of Americans aged 30 to 64,
Okay.
they are not confident that they will ever reach the American dream of being able to own a home. What are the campaigns promising to change that?
Cecilia, look, you've got the Fed cutting interest rates last month, right? And you've got more Americans who want to get back into the housing market. So it's kind of encouraging to see. But Vice President Harris has now proposed a $25,000 down payment assistance program for certain first-time home buyers. She's also proposing a tax incentive for builders of starter homes, which are in short supply.
Yeah, so for the $25,000 down payment assistance, I know they're not going to go into it. But that is for first-time home buyers, I believe, for those with 2 years of renter's experience at least. Any evictions or anything like that would disqualify you outright. And then they mentioned possibly having even more money available if you are a first-generation home buyer. And you can see all that on their website. Tell you what you can't see is any policies on Donald Trump's website. It just says like, hey, we're going to do stuff, but there's no numbers. There's no plans on how they're going to do stuff. But, you know, they expect a vice president to do everything.
The economy, compared to where the country was during the pandemic, and compared to how that has wrecked economies all over the world, the U.S. economy has bounced back. The recession never came. Inflation is coming down. The jobs numbers are good. Can the Harris campaign say any of that without looking out of touch? And are they in the same bind that Joe Biden was in when he was running?
So, okay, that's an interesting point right there as well. So, it feels to the public right now that the economy is awful. But if you look at any of the metrics coming out of our economy, we're doing far better than literally any other country bouncing back from COVID. You look at like the UK, you look at Germany, any of these other places, they're just not coming back the same way we are after Biden. After the Biden administration and the Senate and all that passed the Inflation Reduction Act, that helped a ton. I think we're down to like, what, 2.9% on our inflation?
Tax credit, lots of different tax credits. And so there is some indication that approach...
Yeah, we're at 2.5% inflation currently, which is probably the lowest since 2021, February of 2021. I think a big issue for a lot of people is a big issue with it is people seem to think that prices are going to go down. Prices are never going to go down, but it's just the rate at which they're going up is significantly lower now. Yeah, Watson Songbird, it is a good point. You're right. Here, I'll give you like a special star. That's what you get. Yeah, well, if you're my biggest fan, you use the correct capital letters. It's a capital K, a lowercase v, and then all caps for dolphin. You can try again.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to...
Oh no, sports betting. How will our youth ever survive?
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit.
I guess while we're waiting on this, this should be starting soon. Let's see here. The video's a wee bit quiet. Okay.
Haiti is on the brink of
of transformation.
All right, Mr. Watson, I'm increasing the sound just a little bit. Let me know what you think. See if it sounds any better.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Come on, Julia.
But quick recap of the last debate between Trump and Harris. I'm sure everyone saw the memes online about how they're eating the cats and the dogs and your pets. That's just one of the plenty of lies that Trump told. But it's interesting seeing all the Republicans sitting there trying to say that it was biased because Trump was the only one getting fact-checked. It's like, what's really going on there? Like, why does that not, like, shout at them? Just like the delusion they're seeing. Of just like, yeah, he's being fact-checked, he's lying.
Welcome back to the vice presidential debate coverage on CBS News. Our Ed O'Keefe is ensconced with all of our colleagues in the press corps over there in the room down the aisle from the actual debate location. Ed,
And because we know Vance is going to talk about it, he's going to sit here and he's going to tell Walz about how Kamala is the border czar and how she's let in all these immigrants. And I guarantee they're going to bring that for Bush. I mean, it's all of them. You're what is it, like 6 times more likely to commit a violent crime if you're an American? But it's just more fear-mongering from the right. Shocker.
And we are now just officially minutes away from the start of this debate. I want to get your final thoughts, Major. I want to start with you because we've been saying so much is on the line tonight. How much of tonight is about the audience of one for J.D. Vance?
A considerable amount. President Trump has expectations for J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance knows, as Robert Costa so thoroughly laid out, at age 40, his entire political career is ahead of him. If this ticket does not prevail, the Republican Party will find itself in an uncomfortable and unwelcome and unwanted post-Trump era. What role does J.D. Vance play in that? A considerable amount of that decision will be drawn from what he does tonight. He knows that. In contrast, Governor Walz is 60, 1 year older than Kamala Harris. He does not have any obvious designs on the presidency if Kamala Harris wins and serves out 2 terms. He's there to enhance the ticket as it exists and amplify things on the positive side where and when he can. Very different calculations, very different risk factors for the two.
And Bob, even if you're Bob Dole, who had a bad night in 1976, he was the nominee 20 years later for the Republican Party. So you can even rescue yourself from a bad night. What are your final thoughts on tonight?
Everybody in the press, when we're in the press galleries on the campaign planes, they talk about these vice presidential debates as low impact.
Live in reality and see that Kamala Harris has an actual background in politics, knows how the country works, and is clearly the obvious choice here. I mean, their biggest attacks against her are sexist, racist, sexist, racist, or just lies, like straight up lies. I urge anyone who genuinely believes that Kamala Harris, as VP, let in immigrants into the border to really just Google something. Google, what are the vice president's duties? I think it's like 3 things. What they're the leader of the Senate, the thing they've ever had to do.
There you have Governor Walz appears to be taking some.
Yeah, let's listen to the guy who thinks that somebody turned black or turned Indian. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
That's right. Well, we have the vice presidential debate coming up in a moment. It will be moderated by our own Nora O'Donnell and Margaret Brennan.
Yeah, not even the
Ohio
point
Senator
that, like,
J.D. Vance.
was it J.D. Vance and Walz are told they're not going to have the live fact checking. I mean, it's sad, right, that should even be a thing. I mean, it's very clear which person doesn't want fact checking or which side. It definitely seems like the Republicans just are constantly just moving the goalposts more and more, where it's like, yeah, there probably should be fact-checking if your candidate is literally saying that a group of people in this country are eating people's pets. It's just blatant, like, just hate and racism. It's ridiculous.
With just over a month to go until Election Day, the first and only meeting between the 2 men who hope to become Vice President of the United States, Democratic Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota and Republican Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio.
Now, this is likely the final debate of this election cycle, and voting is already underway in 20 states. CBS News polling shows this remains a race either presidential candidate could win. The CBS News Vice
And that's crazy
Presidential
enough
Debate
as is. I mean, it should not be anywhere near as close as they're saying. I mean, you do have a side literally lying to the American people, and you have a side that wants to institute a child tax credit and help people get homes. It's crazy to me. There's an option there.
Kamala Harris as the next president of the United States.
Other networks here in the U.S. and around the world. We have a consequential night ahead, and our focus is the issues that matter to you, the voter. Let's introduce the candidates. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Ohio's Republican Senator J.D. Vance tonight meeting for the first time.
I'm Margaret Brennan. In order to have a thoughtful and civil debate, these are the rules that both campaigns have agreed to. Questions will be directed at one candidate who will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make further points, with an additional 1 minute each at the discretion of the moderator. The primary role of the moderators is to facilitate the debate between the candidates, enforce the rules, and provide the candidates with the opportunity to fact-check claims made by each other.
CBS News reserves the right to mute the candidates' microphones to maintain decorum. We have not shared the questions or topics with the campaigns. The stage is set. Governor, Senator, thank you for joining us.
Oh man, I was really hoping that we'd get a chance to see them walk out, because I wanted to see another situation where they'd be shaking hands.
On the brink of war. Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact.
There's no way J.D. Vance shook Walz's hands.
Labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas are picketing. We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora. Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed, thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action. President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war. Iran is weakened, but the U.S. still considers it the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to one.
Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
Oh goodness! I hope I'm mistaken. It seems like he's a little bit nervous going into this, which I mean I wouldn't be able to blame him. But he's already kind of tripping over himself some.
Leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago. A nearly 80-year-old Donald Trump talking about crowd sizes is not what we need in this moment. But it's not just that. It's those that were closest to Donald Trump that understand how dangerous he is when the world is this dangerous. His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, the person closest to them, Donald Trump, said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen.
I wonder if they'll talk about J.D. Vance being a never Trumper. I mean, it's a popular clip.
Together, understanding that our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed. And as the Vice President said today we will protect our forces and our allied forces, and there will be consequences.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this.
Mr. Trump's campaign advisors told Vance to be very nice and very cordial because Trump is unable to do it.
Don't know who either one of us are.
But kudos to Vance for actually greeting Walz and the moderators.
My grandmother required Social Security help to raise me. And she raised me in part because my own mother struggled with addiction for a big chunk of my early life. I went to college on the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried about the chaos in the world and the feeling that the American dream is unattainable. I want to try to convince you tonight over the next 90 minutes that if we get better leadership in the White House, if we get Donald Trump back in the White House, the American dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world.
So it's interesting that JD Vance's saying that Donald Trump's all for all this stuff, but can somebody find like one clip of Trump saying any of that?
And we should support
like genuinely
our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
I'd say at least JD Vance is speaking in complete sentences, which is a huge win for the Trump campaign.
Donald Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed Iran's nuclear program in, the inability to advance it. Donald Trump pulled that program and put nothing else in its place. So Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And when Iran shot down an American aircraft in international airspace, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump. And when Iranian missiles did fall near U.S. troops and they received traumatic brain injuries, Donald Trump wrote it off as headaches. Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady leadership that Kamala Harris is providing.
Senator Vance, the U.S. did have a diplomatic deal with Iran to temporarily pause parts of its nuclear program, and President Trump did exit that deal. He recently said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible.
They're going to try to blame it on the vice president because they know they can't blame Biden, right? They blame Biden. Biden's not running. It doesn't help their cause. To be clear, the vice president is a tie-breaking vote in the Senate and a stand-in for the president if he dies. And I know as much as people want to joke about Biden, he is still alive, technically. So she hasn't been president, so there's no way to know what she is actually capable of. That said, you can expect it to be very similar to Biden, but I mean, come on. Any attack against her and her leadership is just unfounded entirely.
Last time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out, the only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
That's also incorrect, by the way. We had drone strikes against fucking Iran. We killed people in the Hezbollah terrorist organization, and that directly benefited Israel, who they wanted them dead. So to say we weren't in any part of the war, not to mention, I mean, Ukraine was still annexing and controlling Crimea, and still are.
Senator Vance, according to CBS News polling, 7 in 10 Americans.
So it's kind of crazy to say there was no new wars. I mean, it's very hit or miss on that.
Favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator, what responsibility would the Trump administration have to try and reduce the impact of climate change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Sure.
Please
so
say it's not real.
Let's start with
That'd be
the
crazy.
hurricane, because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever taken of them because the roof collapsed and those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins me in saying our hearts go out to those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then, of course, afterwards, to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job.
And say it,
I
but
commit
you say
that when
Asheville,
Donald
you got
Trump is
Chimney
president
Rock,
again,
you got
the government will
Blacksburg.
put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. Now, Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say, Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed, some of our Democrats of America, because we're the cleanest economy, and the Kamala Harris's
That's
policies
definitely not true,
actually
by the
led
way.
to more energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more doing business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the best thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite.
Fantastic point.
Governor Walz, you have 2
If
minutes to
Walz can
respond.
bring up the union pullout right now, the strike. You're talking about wanting to put money back into the American workers. Those are the people who need it right now. Walz has this slam dunk on the Republicans right now on that.
In contact with the governors, I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency managements. Governors know no partisanship. They work together. So all of the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there that we recover. But we're still in that phase where we need to make sure that they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen. 2000 in Jeffersonville, Ohio, taking the EV technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing plant in North America sits in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change is real. They've seen 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting, and this has allowed them to tell me, look, I harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy. So the solution for us is to continue to move forward, that climate change is real. Reducing our impact is absolutely critical, but this is not a false choice. You can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs that we're seeing all across the country. That's exactly what this administration has done. We are seeing us becoming an energy superpower for the future, not just the current. And that's what absolutely makes sense. And then we start thinking about how do we mitigate these disasters.
Thank you. Senator, I want to give you an opportunity to respond there. The governor mentioned that President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, and particularly that often the Democrats,
And don't forget, he had 4 years as a president while having control of the House and the Senate and passed barely any legislation at all. And his biggest promise was about the wall, followed by his
solar panels that are made in China. Number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America. Some of them are, Tim, but a lot of them are being made overseas.
No, Trump's biggest promises were about that wall and about getting rid and replacing the Affordable Care Act, of which he did neither, right? Mexico was supposed to pay for that wall. They never did. It never got built. And again, let me remind you, he had control. The Senate had control of the House of Representatives, and they passed nothing towards it. And we saw the Affordable Care Act. Biden helped reinforce the Affordable Care Act.
We're producing more natural gas than we ever have. There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil. But the folks know,
So we're producing more oil than we ever have as a
again,
country.
These are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our #1 export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. Executives to Mar-a-Lago say, give me money for my campaign, and I'll let you do whatever you want. We can be smarter about that, and an all-above energy policy is exactly what she's doing, creating those jobs right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. We're going to turn now to immigration. The crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border consistently ranks as one of the top issues for American voters.
All Walz has to do is hammer on the border bill that Trump had the Senate just kill. That's all he has to do.
And to use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be more specific about exactly how this will work? For example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil? You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started.
There it
and
is.
said
Blaming
she
Kamala
wanted to
Harris on it.
undo all
Let's
of
be
Donald
very
Trump's
clear.
policies.
Kamala Harris
94
has
executive
no
orders
control over the
suspending
border.
deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And what
You were
it's
talking about the
meant is that
asylum.
a lot of fentanyl
Do
is
you want to
coming into
guess
our
as to what
country.
that big
I
border
had a
bill
mother who
did?
struggled with
Among a
opioid
ton of other
addiction and
stuff,
has
it
gotten
also
clean.
greatly
I
reduced the
don't
amount of
want
asylum
people who
seekers
are
we allow
struggling
into the
with
country
addiction
each day
to be
and
deprived
each
of their
year.
second chance because Kamala Harris led
Remember
fentanyl
that
into our communities
Donald
at
Trump called the
record
senators.
levels. So you've
They
got to
killed the bill
stop
before
the
they
bleeding.
before
You've
they
got to
ever even got a chance
re-implement
to read
Donald
it.
Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations, and that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got 20, 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deporting those folks. And wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work. And the final point, Margaret,
Also,
you asked
that
about
20 to
family
25 million
separation.
number,
Right now,
just looked
in
right
this
now, the
country,
Pew
Margaret,
Research Center,
we have
as of 2022, said there were
320,000
11 million
children that the Department of Homeland
unauthorized
Security has
immigrants in the
effectively
U.S.
lost.
Where's he
Some of
getting
them have been
20,
sex
25
trafficking. Some of
million
them
from?
hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family
I mean, hey,
separation
that's just
policy
a
in
quick
this
Google
country
search.
is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide
Something
open
I'm pretty sure
southern
most of the
border.
Trump
And
campaign
I'd
could
ask my
use.
fellow Americans to remember, when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish that she would do that.
Oh, so
It would be good for all of
Kamala
us.
Harris screwed up whenever she was not in
Do you
power.
care to respond to any of those specific allegations, including that the vice president is, quote, letting in fentanyl and using kids as drug mules, among other things regarding children?
The drug mule is not true, but I will say about this, about the fentanyl, because this is a crisis of this, the opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the
Just
last
call
12
him out,
months saw
man.
the largest
Just
decrease
call
in
him out on the
opioid
fact
deaths
that
in our state's
Kamala Harris
history.
is the vice
30%
president.
decrease in Ohio, but there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of the largest state and a border state in California. She's the only person in this race who prosecuted transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this. And that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on immigration that this nation's seen. It was
There it
crafted
is.
by a conservative senator from Oklahoma, James Lankford. I know him. He's super conservative, but he's a man of principle, wants to get it done. Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there.
You keep in mind, by the way, if anyone's actually read the border bill itself, a lot of Democrats were not actually very happy with it. They just wanted to get it passed to help the border, right? And they knew that the only way to get it is about to have a bunch of right-leaning stuff. They're talking about putting ankle monitors on illegal immigrants. I don't know why people say catch and release. This definitely was not that. They're wanting to hold people for like extended periods of time and just straight up kick people out and deny people asylum, even if they might need it. But in order to get the Republicans to sign on to it, they're like, yeah, we'll go with that. It's fine.
Donald Trump had 4 years. He had 4 years to do this. And he promised you, America, how easy it would be. Beautiful wall. And Mexico will pay for it.
And remember, Trump promised that wall while he had control of the Senate and the House of Representatives. That's all you need to pass a law. That's it. And he couldn't do it.
Dehumanizing people and telling him what he was going to do. As far as the deportation plan, at one point, Senator Vance said it was so unworkable to be laughable. So that's where we're at. Pass the bill, she'll sign it.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, the question was, will you separate parents from their children, even if their kids are U.S. citizens? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. And I didn't accuse Kamala Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate freely in this country. And we know that they use children as drug mules, and it is a disgrace, and it has to stop. Look, I think what Tim said just
That is
doesn't
ridiculous
pass
to
the
think that
smell
Kamala
test.
Harris
For
uses
3
children as drug
years,
mules.
Kamala Harris
I
went
urge
out
literally
bragging that
anyone
she was
to
gonna
look that
undo
up and
Donald
see if you can
Trump's
find,
border
I don't know,
policy.
like
She
one
did
video,
exactly that.
one
We had
piece
a
of
record
evidence that
number of
supports the
illegal
claim that
crossings. We
Kamala
had a record
Harris
number
has
of
children
fentanyl coming
drug
into our
mules.
country. And now that she's
Keep in
running
mind
for
that everyone
president,
has a
or a few months
smartphone now
before, she
with
says that somehow she
fantastic
got rid of
cameras on
and
them.
cared a lot about a piece of
Why is there no
legislation.
proof?
The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became the appointed border czar, was to undo
There it is, border czar.
94 Donald Trump executive actions that opened the border. This problem
See,
is leading to
the issue with
massive
Republicans,
problems
I'm
in
going
the
to be very
United
clear
States
with it,
of
right? I
America.
don't hate
Parents
them,
who
right?
can't afford
Donald
healthcare,
Trump,
schools
maybe,
that are overwhelmed.
but
It's
the
got
vast
to stop
majority,
at a
your
bill when Donald
uncles,
Trump's
right?
president.
Your aunts, your cousins who are living across the creek. It's not that they're idiots, right? And some of them might be, let's be honest. But they've been lied to, and they've just been fed this delusional world that's just not true. And they're scared, and they're worried about what's happening. And so it's not really a shocker they believe people like J.D. Vance and Donald Trump. But there's just no proof. There's no facts behind what they say. It's all about scare and fear and hate and anger and racism and sexism, and they just eat it up.
Said it's not true. Don't do it.
It's ridiculous.
There's consequences for this. There's consequences. We could come together. Senator Langford did it. We could come together and solve this if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Tim,
Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just ask you the question first. The governor has made the point, and I think as a sitting lawmaker, you know that Congress controls the purse strings and any funding. So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would, through executive action, solve this. Do you disagree that Congress controls the purse strings and would need to support many of the changes that you would actually want to implement? You have 1 minute.
Look, Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern
Be clear,
border
a
is just
president using
empowering law
executive order
enforcement
to
do
go
their
past
job.
Congress on everything he wants to do, that's not a democracy, that's not a republic, that is a authoritarian dictatorship. And let's be very clear, that's what Trump wants.
Of course, additional resources would help, but most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico, you've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed, you've got hospitals that are overwhelmed, you have got housing that is totally unaffordable because we
Notice Donald Trump didn't say they were overwhelmed. He didn't say that the schools are struggling. No, he said they're Haitian immigrants are eating people's pets. Okay, let's not pretend that this is a normal thing, because it's just not. And to sit there and try to defend it is ridiculous.
But I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator, your time is up.
We don't think Kamala Harris does. That's interesting.
Yeah, well, it is law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped craft it. They're the ones that supported it. That's because they know we need to do this. Look, this issue of continuing to bring this up, of not dealing with it, of blaming migrants for everything. On housing, we could talk a little bit about Wall Street speculators buying up housing and making them less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill also gives the money necessary to adjudicate. I agree, it should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done. This bill gets it done in 90 days. Then you start to make a difference in this, and you start to adhere to what we know, American principles. I don't talk about...
Oh, J.D. Vance better be careful. It looks like Walz actually read the bill.
Talks about, to the least amongst us you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it. This bill does it. It's funded. It's supported by the people who do it, and it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify for our viewers, Springfield, Ohio does have a large number of Haitian migrants who have legal status.
I was about to say, let's be very clear. They aren't illegal either. Oh, please sit there and say it's not the case.
I think it's important
We're going to turn now to the economy. Thank
Yeah, there you go. Cut him off.
That you guys weren't going to fact check.
Cut
Since
him
you're
off.
fact-checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the
Oh my God.
CBP One app, where you can go
So there it is.
as an illegal
For any
migrant,
Republican who wants to sit here and say that it's biased towards Democrats, this is the shit that happens, where they just talk over the moderators and they just let them do it.
That is not a
I
person
want
coming
everyone
in
to say,
applying for a
if
green card and
Walz
waiting
had
for
just
10
done that,
years.
what do you think the
That is
response would be?
implementation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by
Thank
our
you,
own
Senator, for
leadership.
describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Look, he's just
We have
yapping.
so much-
On the book since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The
We
CBP
want to have
One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris
Oh, see, they cut his.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process. Nora.
Thank you, Margaret. The economy is a top concern for voters. Each of your campaigns has released an economic plan, so let's talk about the specifics. Governor Walz, Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion.
Oh, let's also remember that during Donald Trump's presidency, we had the highest increase in our deficit ever in a presidency.
In the middle class, because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand. So those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan with down payment assistance on the front end to get you in a house. A house is much more than just an asset to be traded somewhere. It's foundational to where you're at. And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that.
Let's not forget that practically every Republican in the Senate voted against capping the cost of insulin for elderly people.
Before this law went into effect. As
Right?
far as the
That
housing goes,
only hurts one person, and that is Big Pharma, who wants to sit there and charge $1,900 a month for people who need this life-saving drug.
$6,000
All right?
tax credit. We have
You want to know who was the tie-breaking vote and make sure that we were able to cap insulin for these elderly people, these grandmas or grandpas who needed to live? Kamala Harris was the one who passed that tie-breaking vote.
$5,000 tax credit for small business, increasing that to $50,000. Now, this is a philosophical difference between us. Donald Trump made a promise, and I'll give you this. He kept it. He took folks to Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, I'm going to give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class. What happened there was an $8 trillion increase in the national debt, the largest ever. Now he's proposing
There it is.
a 20% consumption or sales tax on everything we bring in. Everyone agrees.
I'm
including
convinced
businesses, it would be
that Trump does not understand what a tariff is. And for anyone who thinks that it is not a sales tax,
recession. Look, this is
look up what a tariff
Where are we
does.
going? Kamala
Really,
Harris
just
has
look
said
it
to
up.
do the things she wants to do.
Because all it does is it says, hey, you're wanting to ship that stuff in. We're going to charge you 20% more to ship it in. And they're going to go, okay, fuck you. We're going to make your people pay for it. And then the people go, wait a minute, I don't want to pay that. That sucks. And the whole plan, right, is that it's supposed to drag them back into the U.S. But I asked anyone, why do you think they left the U.S.? So it makes stuff cheaper. Because shocker, sweatshops in China tend to make stuff a lot cheaper than we can make in the U.S.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz.
So it's either you have a tariff or they're going to impose a 20% uptick in everything you buy, right? Or maybe they do come back to the U.S. Congrats, you have more jobs where we're not increasing the minimum wage, so you're getting paid like shit, and then everything costs more anyways because being made in the U.S. raises the cost exponentially.
Policies, and what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%, open the American southern border, and make middle-class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great
That's weird that
plans
Kamala
for
Harris
how
did
to
that. I
address
seem to
middle-class
recall her
problems,
not being
then she
president,
ought to
but maybe
do
I'm
them
mistaken.
now. Not one asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can trust.
That's it. So I guess he's
her
admitting
actual
the fact that
plans.
Trump lost the
Now,
elections.
Donald
He did say the
Trump's
American
economic
people
plan
gave
is
her
not
the
just
job.
a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom.
For the record, PhD means you're smart. That takes effort.
in a generation in
And
this
common
country,
sense is not a thing. Common
1.5%
sense is based on where you
inflation, and
grew up.
peace
My
and
common
security
sense is
all
different than
over
somebody
the
who grew up in
world.
a
So when
big
people
city,
say that Donald Trump's
right? It's
economic
different than
plan
someone
doesn't
who
make
grew up in
sense,
China.
I say look at the record. He delivered rising take-home pay for American workers.
So
Now,
I hate to
Tim,
say it, but I mean, I feel like a
admirably,
scientist
admits
might know
that they
more
meant to undo
about
the Trump
science
tax
stuff
cuts. But if you
than
look at what was so
Fred who
different
lives down
about
the street.
Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle-class and working-class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this country. That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings back common sense to this country.
You know what helps the bills? Rent control, where these apartment complexes and stuff, they aren't allowed to just raise the rent by however much they want to do. Republicans don't want that.
Before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one, whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes with this. And I ask you out there, teachers, nurses, truck drivers.
To be clear, by the way, people often get mad that Democrats or the left want to call Trump a Nazi or similar to Hitler. Hitler also denounced scientists and scholars and doctors. It's a very authoritarian thing to do, right? Because you villainize everyone except yourself. You know all the answers, right? You know what's best for the people. It's just an authoritarian playbook, and they're pulling right out of it.
They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage to say to that bipartisan consensus, we're not doing it anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy.
Again, his way of bringing American manufacturing back, right, is by causing every one of us to pay an additional 10 to 20% on everything we buy. Right, in the hope that maybe that'll force the companies to come back. It's ridiculous.
This has to stop, and we're not going to stop it.
Remember, any tariffs like that, it's not felt by the companies, it's felt by the consumers.
Which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Senator, your time is up. Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
Well, if you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were. Look, I'm a union guy on this. I'm not a guy who wanted to ship things overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there, I'm in agreement with him on this. I watched it happen too. I watched it to my communities, and we talked about that. But we had people undercutting the right to collectively bargain. We had right to work states made it more difficult. We had companies that were willing to ship it over, and we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris has a record, 250,000 more manufacturing jobs just out of the IRA.
May I respond to that?
Yes.
So appreciate that. So if you notice, what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics show that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver.
Like y'all saw that, right?
Which of course
what's he saying?
You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did. And then you
Oh, that's
simultaneously
definitely
got
not
to
true.
defend Kamala Harris's atrocious
Inflation under
economic
Trump,
record,
it
which has made
skyrocketed.
gas,
It was unreal.
groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put food on the table in our household. I know what it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on health care then.
Senator, Governor.
Please.
Thank you. Margaret?
We have a lot to get to ahead, gentlemen, on many topics. But right now, I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions. We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town of 400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms, and then I used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that. I came back home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would take baseball teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at. Look, I will be the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress for 12 years. And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things like farm bills that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been from the beginning to make sure that I'm there for the people, to make sure that I get this right. I will say more than anything, many times I will talk a lot, I will get caught up in the rhetoric, but being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID. And I guarantee you he wouldn't start a trade war that he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community. And then it's putting yourself out there and letting your folks understand what it is. My commitment, whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
I think that might be the most straightforward answer we're going to get in this entire thing.
In 2016, you called your running mate, Donald Trump, unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler. I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his.
Little lapdog is what it is.
If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open.
Let's be
about
clear,
the fact that I was wrong
the main
about
reason
Donald Trump.
Trump decided to pick him is because J.D. Vance said he would do what Mike Pence wouldn't in regards to January 6th.
But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people.
He definitely just wants to do whatever Trump
wages,
wants.
Rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed. Now, you pointed out to messages from 2020. Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration the first round if Congress was doing its job. I strongly
I want to be very
believe, and I've been a
clear,
United
Republicans
States senator,
had control of
is not
Congress.
just a
So don't
hot
say
class debate
Congress wasn't doing
site.
their
It's not
job. It's
just a
because
forum
Donald Trump was a
for
bad
senators and
leader.
congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum
You're
to
talking, it was a
govern.
much
So there were a
more
lot of things on
partisan
the
split
border, on
in the
tariffs,
Congress
for
and the House of
example,
Representatives
where I
towards
think that we could have
Republicans
done so
than the
much more
Democrats
if
have
the
now with
Republican
Democrats.
Congress and the
Yet
Democrats in
Joe
Congress
Biden and
had
Kamala Harris
been
have
a
managed to
little
pass
bit
a
better about how
plethora
they govern the country. They were
of
so obsessed with
legislation.
impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't
Trump
actually
wasn't
govern.
able to.
And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national
So again, the
sales
question
tax.
is, would
Look,
Vance be
the
a
one
lapdog?
thing,
And now we're
you're
talking about
probably surprised
tariffs.
to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says, you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
And remember, the
Senator,
middle-class
your time is
Americans
up.
are the ones who are
Laura?
paying
Thank you.
that tariff,
Now to the issue of
not the
reproductive
companies.
rights.
China doesn't give a
Governor
shit
Walz,
about us.
after Roe
They will just
versus Wade
easily
was
raise their
overturned,
prices to
you
make sure we
signed
pay
a
for it.
bill into law that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine.
Absolutely delusional.
Yes or no? Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says, but look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion.
Vance is going to have to get off of this topic so fast. This is awful for him. Just awful for Republicans in general. Anywhere that abortion's on the ballot, women have in vast numbers voted in favor of it. That's why several places are not even wanting to let it on the ballot. I think it was because I don't want to say wrong. I want to say Georgia. It was one of the states where they had enough signatures to get it on the ballot, but it was denied by the Supreme Court there.
At that point, needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy. She went home, got sepsis, nearly dies, and now she may have difficulty having children. Or in Kentucky, Hadley Duvall, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather. Those are horrific. Now, when God asked about that, Senator Vance said, 2 wrongs don't make a right. There is no right.
Let's also talk about it. He said it was an inconvenience. He said that a 12-year-old girl being raped and impregnated by her stepfather was an inconvenience.
Women in charge of their health care.
Not just 2 wrongs don't make a right. No, he said it was an inconvenience.
Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry of pregnancies. It's going to make it more difficult, if not impossible, to get contraception and limit access, if not eliminate.
And remember, Republicans just recently voted against protecting IVF services.
Infertility treatments are why I have a child.
And for anyone who wants to say, oh, but the Supreme Court already said it was allowed. Yeah, the Supreme Court also said that abortions were federally protected, and look at where we're at now. We have women dying because of it.
This might not be right for Washington. That's not how this works. This is basic human right. We have seen maternal mortality skyrocket in Texas, outpacing many other countries in the world. This is about.
If I'm not mistaken, it's outpacing some third world countries as well for the mortality.
We trust women, we trust doctors.
Senator, do you want to respond to the governor's claim? Will you create a federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
No, Nora, certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans.
Keep in mind, Project 2025 is written by a ton of previous workers with Donald Trump. Several members of his cabinet, several members of his administration all helped author that thing. And goodness, I want to say just like a couple months ago, he was giving a speech at a Heritage Foundation event, and those are the people who wrote the Project 2025. And Trump's name is mentioned over 300 times in Project 2025. Not Vance, not Mitt Romney. Romney, not
she
Donald,
hadn't had
not
an abortion,
Joe
that
Biden.
it
No,
would have destroyed her
Donald
life
Trump.
because she
Is
was
a
in an
plan for
abusive
Donald Trump to
relationship.
enact
And
in
I
order
think
to
that when I
put
take
supreme
that as a
control
Republican
over
who
women,
proudly
supreme
wants to
control
protect
over anyone he
innocent
doesn't
life in this
like.
country,
It
who
gives them the
proudly
ability
wants
to
to protect
gut
the vulnerable,
the
is that my
administration
party,
of the
we've gotta
government,
do so
and it would
much
do
better
away
of
with the
a
Department of
job
Education.
at
It would do away with
earning the
FEMA.
American
It would do
people's
away
trust back
with
on this issue where they
the
frankly
CDC, if I'm
just
not
don't
mistaken.
trust us. And I think that's one
Awful.
of the things
And
that
remember,
Donald Trump and I
Trump's
are
team,
endeavoring to
Trump's
do.
previous
I want us
workers
as a
are the ones who
Republican Party
authored that
to be pro-family in
with
the
him
fullest
in
sense of
mind.
the word. I want us to support fertility treatments. I want us to make it easier for moms.
That's interesting that he
who's
said he
going
wants to
have
support
babies. I
fertility
want to
treatments. I
make it
believe he
easier for young
just voted
families
against
to afford a
protecting
home
them.
so they can afford a place to raise that family.
But
And I think
he don't
there's
want to
so
talk about
much that
that.
we can do on the public policy front just to give women more options. Now, of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion policy specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions, let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes the most sense in a very big, a very diverse.
Remember,
and let's be
Republicans would have
honest,
never,
sometimes a
quote,
very,
sent
very
it back to the
messy and
states
divided
if
country.
most of the states were
Governor, would you like
blue.
to respond
They
and
sent it
also
so
answer the question
limit
we offered
women's rights
questions?
as much as possible.
The question got asked, and Donald Trump made the accusation that wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restrictive state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and get her care. Amber Thurman died in that journey back and forth. The fact of the matter is, how can we as a nation say that your life and your rights, as basic as the right to control your own body, is determined on geography? There's a very real chance, had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today. That's why the restoration of Roe versus Wade. When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject and you hear me talk about it, you hear us talking exactly the same. Donald Trump is trying to figure out how to get the political right of this. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said about what's happening. His running mate, though, does not, and that's the problem.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that. He mentioned, it was, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did when I was running for Senate in 2022 talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not, though I know that Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, you know, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are
A good way to earn people's trust, and it's going to be hard to hear. I'm trying to listen very carefully. Try not lying to the country and removing rights from people. That would probably help with the trust.
I'm going to respond on the pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things to try and...
May I respond to that? First of all, Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive, and I certainly wish that she was. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think, whether you're pro-choice or pro-abortion.
That is blatantly false, by the way. If anyone wants to actually read the law, I'll try to post it in the description. That is not what that law says.
Hospitals to perform abortions against their will, because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-based.
Advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, getting engaged, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this: just mind your own business on this. Things worked best when Roe versus Wade was in place. When we do a restoration of Roe, that works best. That doesn't preclude us.
So that's another issue there. They don't need to do a restoration of Roe. They need to just codify it into law.
Sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals.
That's what time. I mean, that's up to them. You know, personally, I think 19 weeks is fair. Because, I mean, we get, what, consciousness between 20 25 weeks. I think past that, you know, maybe it is probably a bit of an issue. But 19 weeks for an abortion,
I asked a specific question, Governor.
I mean, that's plenty of time.
It's not the
What's up
case.
for you?
It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact-checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss. We have to move on, and we're going to be right back with much more.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes. Did you ever have these problems before the derailment? No, ma'am. This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours.
Only one here.
Like
but, like,
here comes the sun.
this is a very boring debate. Let's be very honest here. And part of me kind of misses it. You know what I mean? Like, before Trump, before Harris, before Biden, like, back in, like, I don't know if anyone remembers, like, Obama and Mitt Romney. But, like, that shit was just boring, right? It was kind of nice. Can we just, like, get rid of Trump? And I'll take it. You know, I'll get rid of Harris if y'all get rid of Trump. And we'll just have let's have Walz and JD Vance. I still think Walz would win, but Jesus Christ, at least there'd be some decorum. I'll give JD Vance props here. He's not accusing Haitian immigrants of eating your pet.
Thing I wanted to do.
Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson on Person to Person.
Superstar approaching, superstar approaching.
I can see clearly now that the rain is gone.
That's right. Look at his outfit. Give me some love, baby.
Up top.
It's gonna be alright. Sunshiny day.
All right.
Trying to find the well, never mind. I was trying to find the actual Minnesota birth abortion law. I mean, it just seems like, I mean, that stuff was blatantly false. It seems like it's just saying that, you know, women have the right to choose. It doesn't have to be done at a hospital. It can be done in a birthing clinic.
Debate. We want to turn now to America's gun violence epidemic. The leading cause of death for children and teens in America, is by firearms. Senator Vance, you oppose most gun legislation that Democrats claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s. So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison.
And rightfully so, for anyone who actually wants to read the indictments on that.
Responsible could curb mass shootings. I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Nora, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous. But look, I want to just sort of speak.
I'll give them that because that's exactly what happened. Is
our oldest is now.
Yes, I forget which one. It wasn't the most recent big one, but it was the one before that.
With such hope.
The parents were literally texting him, joking about, like, oh, you know, don't do that, don't do this, you know, we know you're not supposed to have a gun. And they were even sent to the school that day and refused to take the kid out of class. And then, you know, shoots at the school.
And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agree that we need to do better on this. The question is just how do we actually do it? Now, here's something
how
that
we
really
actually
bothers
solve
me,
the gun
worries me
violence in
about
America.
this
Do
epidemic of
something.
violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally
murdering
kids
people
to
with
go
them.
To school
The vast
in a
majority.
school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of
But I
security.
mean, that's typical for Republicans. They don't want to give you the source. So yeah, maybe it is something like 90% are illegally obtained from stealing it from your parents or giving a gun to someone who's under 21 or 18, depending on where you're at.
Because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer. And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan solutions for how to do that.
Governor, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think all the parents watching tonight, this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look,
why is it harder for me to get a driver's license and drive a vehicle than it is for me to get an AR-15? As much as anyone wants to try to act like it's not the case, you can do a hell of a lot more damage with an AR-15 than you can a four-door sedan.
I agree with that, but that's not far enough when we know there are things that worked. I've spent time in Finland and seen some Finnish schools. They don't have this happen, even though they have a high gun ownership rate in the country. There are reasonable things that we can do to make a difference.
I think in Finland, by the way, you're not allowed to have any ammo in the gun. It has to be stored separately. If it's at your house, the ammo and the gun and stuff have to be kept in separate safes. My bad.
Worked on this issue. She knows that it's there.
There are solutions. It's just Republicans vote against them every single time.
I ask all of you out there, do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go? When we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills. They're being kids. We owe it to them to get a fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms, and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said actually about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland. Is okay, first of all, we have way higher rates of headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools we've got to talk about
For the record, by the way, the bad guys shooting up the schools, the vast majority of them were legally purchased firearms.
Did you change your position? Why?
Yeah, I
wouldn't be surprised if all of them were legally purchased, at least by the parents.
I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was an NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety. I'm of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today. And several things I want to mention on this is, talking about cities and where it's at, the number one where the most firearm deaths happen in Minnesota are rural suicides. And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues, making sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent. And I think what we end up doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes
And remember,
it just is the guns.
let's be very clear,
It's just the guns.
Democrats put forth a
there are
bill
things that you
that
can
is
do
to
about it.
a
But I do
vast
think that
array
this
of
is
mental
one,
health
and I
services
think
to
this is
our
a healthy
public
conversation.
schools
I
that
think
was
there's a
voted
capacity to find
against
solutions
by
on
the
this that work.
Republicans in the
Protect
Senate.
Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
Gentlemen, thank you. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora.
Her
Let's
life
turn
up
now
until
to
the
the top
baby's born.
contributor to inflation, the high cost of housing and rent. There's a shortage of more than 4 million homes in the United States, and that contributes to the high housing prices. Governor Walz, the Harris campaign promises a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million
Oh, even I
new
didn't know about the
homes.
tax credit on
Where
the
are you
homes.
building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
No, it's not handing out. We have, first, let me say this issue of housing, and I think those of you listening on this, the problem
It's a zoning
we've had
issue more than
is
anything else, but I
that
don't know
we've
if they'll
got
mention
a lot
it.
of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be bought
No,
up,
it's not
it can be
commodity drought.
shifted, it can be moved around.
The zoning is
Those
really
are not
weird
folks
with our
living in those
government,
houses.
and
Those of you
it used not to
listening
be this
tonight,
way. It
that
used
house
to
is a
be
big
back
deal.
in
I
like the
bought and owned
40s
one
through like
house
the
in my life.
60s. It was a
My
lot more
mom still
loose, a lot
lives
more
in the
lax,
house
and
where I
people were kind
was.
of, you were
And
able
when
to
I
buy
think of
land, build a house on your
I'm
land, you're good to
thinking of
go.
Christmas services
But
after
nowadays
midnight
it's
mass
very
where you
like
go with your
hit or miss. And I
family.
don't know
We
if
need
anyone
to
lives in
make
like a
it
smaller
more
town,
affordable.
you're
And
just you're
one
not
of
going
the
to
things, as
see
I said,
3, 4,
this
5-story
program
apartment
that the Vice
buildings. You're not going
President
to see
is
tons and tons and tons of
pushing forward and
houses.
bringing
You're
in
going to have
new
these
way
little
of approaching
subdivisions.
is
You're
something
going to
we're
have
doing in
2,
Minnesota from that
maybe
lead.
3-story apartment
We in the
buildings. You're not going
state
to have like 10,
invested
15
in making
stories.
sure our housing
And it's
was
because
the
of the
biggest
zoning
investment that
laws
we'd
that
ever
are
made in
voted
housing.
on. And
It
that's,
starts to
I'm
make
not
it
going to lie, it's pretty
easier.
stressful
We
both
cut some of the
Democrats
red
and
tape.
Republicans
Local folks,
who
look,
vote on
we
that
can't do it
stuff.
federal value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city where we've seen the lowest inflation rates. We've seen a 12% increase in stock because we've put some of these things in, and we're implementing a state program to make sure we give some of that down payment assistance. We get it back from people because here's what we know. People with stable housing end up with stable jobs. People with stable housing have their kids able to get to school. All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in, but we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affordable housing, but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart it, create that base.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks,
What
and
regulation?
cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices. Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising, and what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for
Kamala Harris is a vice president right now. Again, tiebreaker in the Senate.
Mentioned a bunch of
replaces
ideas.
Biden if he
Now, some of
dies.
those ideas I actually think are halfway decent.
That's about
and
it.
some of them I
Confirms the
disagree
new
with,
president.
but the most
Confirms the
important
election
thing here
results.
is
That's it.
Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people
clear,
gave her.
I don't know how many times I'm going to say this, by the way.
And do nothing.
That's just not how the vice presidency
the
works. Take a civics class. You can go on YouTube. You can find it like an 8-hour civics class. Just watch it.
Margaret, what would immediately
watch on your way to work, watch on your way home, watch it while you're in the shower. You'll learn a lot about how the vice president doesn't do shit.
Drill, baby, drill. One of the biggest drivers of housing costs, aside from illegal immigration, is think about it. If a truck driver's paying 40% more for diesel,
by the way,
then the lumber
we're
he's
supposed to be talking
delivering
about
to the
housing
job site
right
to
now.
build the house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods too.
Senator Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer?
Can I have it?
Yeah. Governor, we will get to you in a moment. But Senator, where are you going to seize the federal lands? Can you clarify?
Well, what Donald Trump has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used
Where?
for national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be
Any
opening
states,
up building in this
any
country.
districts,
We
any
have
counties?
a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking out illegal immigrants who are competing for those homes, and we should be building more homes for the American citizens who deserve to be here.
Senator, your time is up.
Love to know
Governor, I do
where.
want to let you respond to the allegation.
A lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the countries we do. There's not a lot of federal lands in and around Minneapolis, for example. So the issue is I don't understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's
Surely.
fresh water.
But
These
hey,
lands
you
protect.
didn't say
They're
where
there
we're
for a
supposed
reason.
to build
They
these
belong to
houses
all
at.
of us. But again, this is when
Yellowstone
you
National
housing
Park.
and
Fuck
you view
that.
these things as commodities.
I'm trying to have a new
There's a chance to
subdivision.
make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this. We've seen it in Minnesota. We're able to refurbish some of these houses. We're able to make some investments. That gets people in. And I'm still on the fact on this. Economists, Senator Vance, you said you don't like the economists. Which economists are saying that it is immigrants that's adding to the cost?
Governor,
Where's
your
the study?
time is up. But Senator, on that point, I'd like for you to clarify. There are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But we increasingly have
You guys
a
ever done like a
federal
Mad Lib?
administration that makes
I think
it
the blank
harder
is
to
like
develop
insert
our
candidate.
way to millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
What are the federal regulations? I deal with this as a governor.
You can very quickly reply.
I'm sorry. I get this as a governor, and I don't necessarily disagree with that in some cases, many of those are local, many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you. Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell. But Nora?
Thank you. One of the top problems facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, "I have concepts of a plan." Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work? And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Remember, Trump wants to get rid of that, by the way.
We're gonna cover
The Biden
Americans with
administration,
pre-existing
Biden
conditions. In
administration
fact,
made
a
it
lot of
where
my family members
private
have
insurance
gotten
companies
health
could not
care.
discriminate on you for,
I
like, let's
believe,
say if you
you
had
know,
like
members of my
cancer,
family
Farbergo,
actually got
or
private health
had
insurance
pre-existing
for
medical
the first
conditions.
time,
Republicans
switched
want to
off
get
of
rid of
Medicaid
that
onto private insurance for the first time
in an effort to
under
lower
Donald Trump's
insurance
leadership.
costs.
And I
It's
think that,
ridiculous.
you know, a lot of people have criticized this concept.
Like, yeah, it reduces it for the people who aren't sick, but you just say fuck you to everyone who's ever had a past condition.
You're not going to propose a 900-page bill.
And that's just not the
standing on
American
a
way.
debate
We're supposed to
stage
hold
and
each other
bore
up.
everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the first time in a very long time. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald Trump's entire 4 years, they were up about 1.5%. He introduced.
So very clear, by the way,
transparency.
Republicans
Think
voted
about healthcare.
against
You go to a
capping the
hospital,
cost of
you try to
insulin
buy
and other
something, and
medications for
nobody
people,
knows what
and
it
we
actually
barely
costs.
managed to
That
get
price
the
transparency will
medications
actually
at
give American
$35,
consumers
insulin
a
at
little bit more
$35
choice, and
a
will
month,
also drive down
only
costs.
because Kamala
We
Harris
talked
did the
about,
tie-breaking vote in favor
the
of it.
reinsurance regulations is what I was talking about.
That's
Look,
what's
Donald
saving
Trump has
lives.
said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both the chronically ill but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations when he was president of the United States. And I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump
Trump
came
didn't do
along.
anything with
I think this is an important
Obamacare.
point
He
about
said he was going
President
to
Trump. Of
repeal
course,
it
you don't have
and
to
replace it,
agree
and he
with
never
everything
did that at
President
all.
Trump has
That's a
ever
blatant
said
lie.
or ever done. But when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and healthcare costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure that Americans had access to affordable care. It's not perfect, of course, and there's so much more that we can do, but I think that Donald Trump has earned the right to put in place some better healthcare policies. He's earned it because he
Except
did
he
it
had 4
successfully
years
the
and
first
didn't
time.
add anything to it.
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a major healthcare state, home of the Mayo Clinic, home to Medical Alley, 3M, Medtronic, all of those. We understand healthcare. It's why we're ranked first on affordability and accessibility and quality of healthcare. And so what I know is under Kamala Harris, more people are covered than they have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to. Go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. Too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26. Kamala Harris negotiated drug prices for the first time with Medicare. We have 10 drugs that will come online, the most common ones that'll be there. But look, this issue, and when Donald Trump said, I've got a concept of a plan, it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more? So what they're going to do is let insurance companies pick who they insure because guess what happens? You pay your premium, it's not much. They're figure they're not going to have to pay out to you. But those of you a little older, gray, got cancer, you're going to get kicked out of it. That's why the system didn't work. Kamala Harris will protect and enhance the ACA.
Governor, thank you. Senator, you have not yet explained how you would protect people
Remember the
with
Affordable Care Act. We have more
pre-existing
people
conditions or
insured
laid
in
out
this
that
country than
plan.
we ever
Well,
have
look,
before.
We currently have laws and
But Trump wants
regulations
to get rid of that.
in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president. Inflation was low. Take-home pay was higher. And he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job, which is govern in a bipartisan way and get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And the question about this of young people or whatever, that's the individual mandate piece of this. And Republicans fought tooth and nail saying, well, Americans should be free to do this. Well, then what happens is... So you think
the individual mandate's a good idea?
You shrink. I think the idea of making sure the risk pool is broad enough to cover everyone, that's the only way insurance works. When it doesn't, it collapses. You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care. People expect it to be there. And when we are able to make it, and we are making it this way, when we incentivize people to be in the market, when we help people who might not be...
I apologize. We're out of time. We have a number of subjects to discuss. Margaret?
Let's talk about families in America. There is a child care crisis in this country, and the United States is one of the very few developed countries in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walz, you've said that if Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now, you may work for a big company. Look, we're home.
We're supposed to be the greatest country in the world. And
Kamala Harris knows
if you're a
that.
dad especially, I mean, women, I think the mothers get it significantly. Almost everywhere you get some maternity leave. But where else are you get paternity leave? In several other countries you are.
We in Minnesota,
it's just as important for a father to have time with his child, but Republicans don't want that.
Back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount of time. What we know is that gets the child off to a better start. The family works better. We stay in their employers. We get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota, and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it, and here's the issue, those big companies are able to offer it. Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some places, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that. This is the case of an economy that Donald Trump has set for the wealthiest amongst us. He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest. He's willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. And so a paid family medical leave program, and I will tell you, go to the families or go to the businesses and ask them. As far as childcare on this, you have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have to
paid leave program, and if so, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they're home taking care of their newborn? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats, too, have worked on this issue. And I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who is an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator. And I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company. But the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids. Some would like to spend longer at home with the kids. We should have a family care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal program, any of these federal monies, we want to promote choice in how we deliver family care and how we promote child care because, look, it is unacceptable. And, you know, of course, Tim and I have been on the campaign trail a lot the past 7 or 8 weeks. And one of the biggest complaints I hear from young families is people who feel like they don't have options, like they're choosing between going to work or taking care for their kids. That is an incredible burden to put on American families. We're the only country that does it. I think we could do a heck of a lot better.
Senator, thank you. You have also said, Senator Vance, many things about the American family. The Federal Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on child care as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President Trump recently said, as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in. Is President Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in that are shipping jobs overseas. That's the heart of the economic proposal. And I think what President Trump is saying is that when we bring in this additional revenue with higher economic growth, we're going to be able to provide paid family leave, child care options that are viable and workable for a lot of American families.
Can you clarify how that will solve the child care shortage?
Well, because as Tim said, a lot of the child care shortage is we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, look, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide child care options for American families. Because the
remember back in the 60s, whenever like your fucking great grandparents were buying a house for like $50 or something, they were working minimum wage and affording a house after a year. We're taxing the top 1% at like 90%, I believe. It's unreal. Right now we're at what, 18%?
And $3,000 credit for
20%?
over the
I forget.
age of 6 as your campaign.
Definitely not
promised.
90%.
Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's $5,000 or $6,000, that pays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarships types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is, the question you asked is, You're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another 4,000 on the growing, but we need the workforce.
Governor, thank you. We need to move on. Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy, the top issue for Americans after the economy and inflation. After the 2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others filed 62 lawsuits contesting the results.
Zero
Judges,
evidence in
including those
any of
appointed
them, by the
by
way,
President
in
Trump
case you
and
didn't
other
remember.
Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked
Housing affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020, and my own belief
No
is that we
proof
should fight
whatsoever.
about those issues, debate those issues peacefully in the public square, and that's all I've said, and that's
Peacefully.
all that Donald Trump has said. Remember,
Remember.
he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January
He said
the
peacefully
20th,
one
what happened?
time,
Joe Biden
20
became
minutes
president,
in to an
Donald Trump
hour
left
and
the
a
White
half
House, and
speech
now,
talking
of
about
course,
fight like hell
unfortunately,
or you're
we have
going
all
to
of the
lose your
negative policies
country.
that have come from the
But
Harris
yeah, you
Biden
said, you know, I know you're
administration.
going to go
I
peacefully.
believe that we
20
actually
minutes
do
into
have
an
a threat
hour
to
and a half
democracy in
long
this country,
speech.
but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris
So,
and
also, for
Tim
anyone
Walz want to talk
wondering,
about. It
Mr.
is the
J.D.
threat
Vance
of
just said,
censorship. It's Americans
I would
casting
still
aside
say no to the
lifelong
election.
friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies
Sore
silencing their
losers.
fellow citizens, and it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation. I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years.
So to be
Now, I'm
clear,
really proud,
telling people they
especially given that I was
can't
raised by two lifelong
spread
blue-collar
blatantly false
Democrats,
misinformation in an effort to
have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition.
basically
Of course,
telling
they
people,
don't
hey,
agree with me and
you
Donald Trump
probably
on every
shouldn't
issue.
lie to the
We don't
American
have to agree
people.
on every issue, but
They
we're
believe
united
you,
behind a basic
and
American First
that's
Amendment
not okay.
principle that we ought to
That's
debate our differences.
boo.
We ought to argue about them. We ought to try
Lying to win the
persuade our fellow
election.
Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in
Absolutely.
censorship at an
It's
industrial
ridiculous.
scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues. And that, to me, is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
Governor?
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here. And I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator.
Me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because I think we need to tell the story. Donald Trump refused to acknowledge this, and the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he didn't. 140 police officers were beaten.
Didn't like the insurrection
by Mike
either.
Pence. Mike Pence made the right decision. So, Senator, it was adjudicated over and over and over. I worked with kids long enough to know, and I said as a football coach, sometimes you really want to win, but the democracy is bigger than winning an election. You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter. People hear that. So I think this issue of settling our differences at the ballot box, shaking hands when we lose, being honest about it.
Don't forget,
deny what
when J.D.
happened
Vance was
on January
asked,
6th,
would you
first
certify
time
the
in
election?
American history
He said,
that a president or anyone.
It's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country. We are going to
That is the biggest little horse shit I've ever heard.
And of course, I hope that we win. And I think
January
we'll win,
6th didn't
but if
happen,
Tim Walz
y'all.
is the next vice president,
He
he'll have my
peacefully
prayers,
handed
he'll
over
have my
power.
best wishes, and he'll have my
Although,
help whenever he
right
wants
after,
it.
at the other
But we
debate, he's
have to
like,
remember
no,
that for
I never
years
said
in
I
this
lost the
country,
election. That was a
Democrats
joke.
protested the results of
So did he
elections.
peacefully hand
Hillary
over
Clinton
the
in
power, or did he
2016
win the
said
election?
that Donald Trump had the
Can't
election
really do both.
stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time. And if we want to say that we need to respect the results of the election, I'm on board. But if we want to say, as Tim Walz is saying, that this is just a problem that Republicans have had, I don't buy that.
It very much is a problem that Republicans had.
January 6th was not Facebook ads.
Spread this massive lie saying that the Dominion voting machines were like Russian backed and hacked. Fox News had to pay something like $280 million in a defamation lawsuit because of them lying. Right? And defamation isn't something you can just get for lying. No, you have to lie about somebody. It has to be false information. It has to be done maliciously, which is very hard to prove in a criminal court or the civil court. And they lost.
Did he lose the 2020 election?
Believing in democracy, the most sacred right under the United States democracy is the
push him on it, man. If you push him on this, I'd be just don't let it change. Next question: did Donald Trump lose the election?
And big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't wear masks.
Senator, the governor does have the floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to respond.
Disgusting.
Yeah. Well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is I see a candidate out there who refused, and now again, and this I'm pretty shocked by this. He lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look,
if you believe that Donald Trump did not lose that debate, you are un-American and completely delusional.
What I'm concerned about is
there's no proof that he won, right? He lost the popular vote both times, mind you. Even whenever against Hillary, he lost the popular vote. He lost the electoral college vote, and then he tried to lie and have Mike Pence say, "Oh, we don't know which electors are real," so that it would get sent back to the House. It's ridiculous. Trump lost the election, and if you believe otherwise, you just take your head out of your fucking ass. Jesus Christ.
Because of course that's what we would do. So America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, your time is up. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be right back with both of our candidates. The CBS News Vice Presidential Debate continues.
To be clear, for January 6th, it's undisputed that Trump's team hired a false set of electors. I believe it was 7 sets for the swing states. And what those people did is they forged themselves and said they were the duly elected electors. Right? They were not. They were sent to the Capitol, and you can see a video of this, where they claimed, right? Let's mute this real quick. They claimed, right, that they were the duly elected electors when they weren't. The other electors were already on. These electors are the real electors. Why don't we just have a little bit of a vote about it? And what that was going to do is send the election back to the House. Every single vote cast, both for Trump and for Biden, was going to be thrown out, right? Just straight up discarded, and have the House vote. Each member, each state would have 1 vote. Shocker, there are more Republican states than Democrat states, all right? So you'd have something like a vote of 30 to 20, something like that. And I don't even know if it's that big. It might be something a lot closer, maybe something like 27 to 23. At that point, that would have decided the election. 50 voters would have decided the entire election. That's what Trump wanted to do, because Trump knew he'd win. That was cheating. He lied. He wanted that to happen. Right? And a key piece of evidence for that, right, was the fact that for months and months and months, he was claiming there's this voter fraud, right, with no proof. He is calling the DOJ and telling them, hey, I need you to tell all these states that we found voter fraud. And they're like, hey, we don't have any voter fraud, right? He's like, don't care. Tell them. I want you to tell them. A president's never done that before, right? Thankfully, the DOJ is like, yeah, no, we're not doing it. When, bro, it's just unreal. It is shocking to me that anyone's willing to listen to what he has to say. with any realism there. Like, bro's over here spouting stuff about cats and dogs, right? He thinks that Democrats are trying to kill babies after they're born. He doesn't know where he's at. He talks about electric sharks. And he has, what, 50% of the vote right now? Or I guess 47? What's going on? It's unreal. But you got Trump and you got Kamala Harris. She's got some bad stuff in her past. Getting into prison, keep them out of prison. Yeah, crazy. Trump has, 6 major bankruptcies. Every venture he's ever gone down failed. In the 70s, he and his father were sued for discrimination, and they settled it because they knew they were going to lose in court. Because he was blatantly just not renting to black people. It's unreal.
Welcome back to the CBS News Vice Presidential Debate. It is now time for the closing statement. Senator Vance won the virtual coin toss and elected to go last. So, Governor Walz, you are first. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Senator Vance. Thank you to CBS News. And most importantly, thank you to all of you. If you're still up and the folks who miss Dancing with Our Stars, I appreciate it. But look, the support of the democracy matters. It matters that you're here. And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built, from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift, and a whole bunch of folks in between there. And they don't all agree on everything, but they are truly optimistic people. They believe in a positive future of this country and one where our politics can be better than it is. And I have to tell you, that better than it is the sense of optimism that there can be an opportunity economy that works for everyone, not just to get by, but to get ahead. And the idea that freedom really means something. Not the freedom of government to be in your bedroom or exam room, but the freedom for you to make choices about yourself. Now, look, we all know who Donald Trump is. He's told us, and as Maya Angelou said, believe him when he told you that. His first inaugural address talked about American carnage, and then he spent 4 years trying to maybe do that. Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road. Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said, Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that. All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive. I humbly ask for your vote on November 5th for Kamala Harris.
Governor Walz, thank you. Senator Vance, your closing statement.
Well, I want to thank Governor Walz.
So you have hope.
You folks
He's
at
talking about
CBS,
wonderful
and of course,
future.
the American people for tuning in this evening.
Let's see what Vance has
One of
to
the
say.
issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that, too, has gotten harder with because of Kamala Harris's policies.
I don't believe this.
Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges.
Remember, Trump said that on day one he's going to be a dictator and overturn the Constitution in order to search for voter fraud.
1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I
notice, by the way, he's not listed a single policy, not one, that Kamala Harris did. I don't think he listed a single policy at all.
The grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. but they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote...
CBS News, thank you and good night.
Yeah, I'm tired, like awfully tired. So, oh, did they shake hands? I missed it. Hold on. Oh well. Well, man, I gotta work in the morning. I'm gonna leave you with this. Kamala Harris is the vice president. She is the president of the Senate, meaning she is allowed to take place in tie-breaking votes. If Biden dies, she becomes president. And she's there to say, hey, this election was normal. We're good. That's her whole job. That's it. She doesn't make laws. Not yet. And she certainly doesn't control the border. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And J.D. Vance refused to say that Donald Trump lost the election. Leave you at that. Adios, mi amigo.